Sorry. Can I get out of the light? Thank you. Okay, so hello, I'm Mark Finney. I'm an assistant professor of mass communication still at Adams State College. Still because I might become an associate professor this morning. This is Dominique Davis. She's a junior here, a mass communication major, and she's from Denver. And that's Toni Steffens, who's a senior mass communication major. And she is the editor of the Sand Hill Review and the assistant editor of the Paw Print. So, here we go. Sorry.
Okay, so good morning. I'm Toni Steffens Stewart.
And I'm Dominique Davis.
And we're presenting Who's Listening, an analysis of KRZA patrons, supporters, and content. It's a research project that we undertook along with Kevin Blomgren, Gerald Rodriguez, Samantha Hall, Jesse Medina, Will Cameron, and James Williams in mass communication research methods with Dr. Mark Finney during the spring 2011 semester at Adams State College. The students were asked to research ways that the station could increase their listenership and fundraising, and to identify demographic characteristics of the current listeners. They were also interested in better understanding how residents of the San Luis Valley and surrounding communities felt about their mission statement. KRZA was started by a small group of women in the San Luis Valley to serve the Hispanic community. They first went on the air in 1985 and have been on the air despite some early setbacks since that time. They've collected some information from their listeners during fund drives, but never enough to provide any direction. So Holly Felmley, KRZA General Manager, worked in cooperation with the students to develop questions and to conduct surveys and focus groups with the hope of finding ways to increase the number of listeners, number and amount of contributions, and to evaluate their mission statement. The class decided to gather information in 3 sections: demographics and content to collect quantitative data, and focus groups to gather qualitative data.
During the demographics research, the quantitatives group's goal was to gather an accurate representation of the community's opinion about KRZA and also the demographic makeup of the listeners. Both the community members who were members of KRZA and those who were not were considered important potential research subjects. The research team hoped that the audience research data would represent relationships between KRZA's mission statement, donations, income, underwriting, demographics, and the connection between the listeners and KRZA. The mail-in survey method was not accurate due to financial restraints. The group was unable to distribute enough surveys to the non-listeners in the community, so the data was also not relevant in this case. The hours of attempted phone surveys also turned out to provide little data. The online survey, however, which was emailed to members, announced on air, and also was available online, turned out to be the most successful method in reaching respondents. The students found after gathering the data from the quantitative group that the respondents of the KRZA online survey did not meet the expected diversity in the San Luis Valley. The 2010 Colorado census states that in Alamosa, 43.8% of the city is made up of Hispanic heritage. In our online survey, however, 78.6% of the 117 respondents were Caucasian, and only 12.8% were Hispanic. Although the data did not accurately represent the diversity that exists in the community, there is still a lot of valuable information that KRZA can take away from this data. Another interesting finding is that the percentage of male and female listeners is fairly close. 49.6% of the listeners were male, 47% were female, and 3.4% chose not to answer. According to the correlations between ethnicity, gender, connection to KRZA, and amount of annual giving, one can conclude that race has little bearing on the willingness to donate to KRZA. There's a slight positive correlation between Caucasians and contributions. Gender has little to no impact on the amount of donations given. However, there is a very strong correlation linking the listener's personal connection to KRZA and the amount that they are willing to donate. According to the data, 23.1% of the listeners are between the ages of 58 and 62. The majority of the listeners are older. Only around 12% of the respondents have less than a college degree, and the rest a higher education. One of the most important elements of this research was to quantify the popularity of the programs on KRZA. NPR shows were the highest rated based on a scale from 1 to 5. When looking at the correlation between NPR shows and donations, we are able to observe that there's a strong positive correlation between the favorability of NPR and the donations. The online surveys that were conducted shows that NPR has a large impact on the donations that KRZA receives. Respondents were asked to rate the KRZA programming on a scale from 1 to 5, and the NPR shows were most preferred. Most of the top 10 shows were from NPR, and the bottom 10 shows were mostly locally produced. We also determined that only 17.1% of the listeners feel a very strong connection to KRZA. There's a strong correlation between how connected the listeners feel to KRZA and how much they're willing to donate. The average amount that they are willing to donate is between $25 to $50. A majority of listeners were neutral when asked how important it was to them that KRZA maintained a Spanish culture. For the content analysis, a code sheet was made and distributed to others in the class. Students were then assigned shows to analyze and then undertook training before the analysis actually began. By learning about KRZA's current programming schedule and content, the students were able to recognize that KRZA's main goal was to appeal to as many listeners within the community as possible. Based on the data collection, only 4 of the shows that were listened to were primarily directed to a Hispanic audience and broadcast in Spanish. Those shows include Espiritu Maya, Aspectos Culturales, Regional and Cultural, and Descarga. Some other programs have both English and Hispanic programming and would appeal to both demographics. Those programs include Health and Community, Agriculture and Miscellaneous, Finishing Touches, and Swing Time in the Rockies. The data shows that a small percent of Hispanics responded to surveys, and the programming they preferred was specifically targeted toward a Hispanic audience. KRZA made it clear to the students that increasing Hispanic listenership was a priority. Few shows are truly devoted to Spanish music. The sound quality was often good, but there were a few shows that had poor quality. Those included Swing Time in the Rockies, Monday Morning Mix-Up, and Health and Community. There was a fairly consistent issue with fuzziness and a lack of sound precision. There was also volume control problems with several of the shows, and the voice of the DJ was either extremely loud or extremely too soft in relation to the content. Dead air was also a significant problem. Overall, the host quality was good. DJs were rated on a scale from 1 to 5, and most were rated in the 4 range. Most of them showed good personality and a strong sense of professional skills. NPR shows were rated as high quality. A large part of the content on KRZA is the underwriters and sponsors. Students found that most underwriting spots are taken between the times of 6:30 a.m. and 9 a.m. and then from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m.
7 focus groups were conducted to gather qualitative data for the project. A request for volunteers was put in the local lifestyles and advertised by flyers and on the KRZA Facebook page. Volunteers were also sought through email requests and on the ASU portal page. 4 of the groups were held at the Alamosa Library. 1 was held at a popular coffee shop in Taos, and another was held at the college library. No identifying information was collected from participants, but each was asked to fill out a short demographics form to help us record demographic information, including their age, education, sex, and their annual income. All of the participants were Caucasian, and most had attained or were in the process of attaining a college degree. The youngest participant was 19 years old, but the majority were over 30. Focus group questions were divided into 4 sections: funding, listeners, community, and programming. For funding, many of the participants did not understand how the station was funded, and once they were informed, they suggested that the station create a more recognizable presence to encourage funding through member contributions and through underwriting. Some participants said that they would not advertise with the station, but would find a better use for their money. Some would be more likely to contribute if the programming was changed. Listeners prefer the nationally syndicated shows. One listener said that he would only listen to NPR shows and none of the other shows that were on the station. This preference is consistent with what George Bailey found in his research, that audiences often feel loyal to stations that carry NPR programming, and he also found that listeners are more likely to contribute to a station if they feel loyal to it. Participants suggested that the station appealed to more than just one demographic, and several said that they felt that the station favors Hispanic listeners because of Hispanic programming and because of the mission statement. One listener felt that the station had moved away from their original mission and were not doing as much for the Hispanic community. Most did agree that the station should try to encompass the interests of the whole San Luis Valley and not just one ethnic group. Participants felt that their feeling of community would be improved if the station offered more local programming with state and local politics and original news content. Most would also like to see the mission statement include more than just one audience. They believe that the mission statement did not create a sense of community for those who were not in that ethnic group. Most did support a mission statement that includes the whole community. Participants suggested adding music, outdoor programming, news, and sports, and they would also like to see more musicians and guest speakers. They said that DJs should be more professional and that the stumbling DJs hurt listenership. One said that the DJs have improved since a staff turnover several years ago.
We were able to suggest that the station focus on improving production quality on local programming to help improve listener satisfaction with the content of the station. The respondents were divided as to whether the station should have less diversity or greater diversity in their programming. In an article on the Radio Sutton blog, it was found that public radio will only appeal to a certain audience, and that it may not be useful to the station to try to appeal to the whole population. We were also able to suggest that the station focus on educating local businesses about underwriting in order to increase the number of businesses involved. Many of the respondents did not understand how the station was funded and underestimated the importance of member and listener contributions in underwriting. The mission statement for KRZA is a contentious issue for many listeners and people who volunteer or are otherwise affiliated with the station. Many of our respondents felt that the mission statement was an inaccurate representation of the station. Ken Stern found in his research that many public radio stations do reach out to Black and Hispanic listeners. Excuse me. They will usually try to grow their audience by trying to include those groups. KRZA listeners felt that the Hispanic audience is ignored and that the amount of programming directed towards Hispanics is significantly less than it should be to comply with the mission statement. On the other hand, many listeners also felt that the programs aimed at the Hispanic audiences are isolating to other groups, and many will tune out when those programs come on. It is important to note that gaining Hispanic listeners may allow KRZA to receive grants that would bring in additional funds for the station.
We were ultimately not able to recommend a definite course for the station to take with the mission statement, but we did recommend that they either more clearly adjust their programming to appeal and serve the Hispanic audience, if the grant is more preferred. But they do need to realize that most contributors are older, well-educated, and Caucasian, or they could create more clarity on the goals of the station by rewriting their mission statement to de-emphasize the focus on Hispanic listenership and refocus on covering a more broad area of tastes. Thank you, and we now have some time for questions. Yes.
What was the reaction from KRZA? Essentially, you're telling them that most of the people who donate to your station are not terribly interested in the Spanish programming. Your Spanish programming is listed as some of the lowest listened to and lowest rated programming, but your mission statement and your goal is to aim yourselves at the Hispanic population. So you're going the opposite of what your listenership wants. So how did they react to that?
What we did for our class, at the end of the class, we brought our report to Holly Family, and she took it on to the board. So we have not actually heard anything back from the board at this time, and we haven't.
So they didn't invite you guys to come speak to the board then?
I don't know if they would have wanted us to go or not, but it just didn't work out that we did.
Okay.
And we haven't gotten any response in any way.
When did you turn that into?
At the end of the spring semester.
Yeah, so
in
last
2011.
May.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Mark's on the board, right?
Oh, so you guys
So
have
you
some.
can answer the question. How did they
Well,
react?
I wasn't on the board at the time, although I did present it to the board, and they took it and said it was very interesting, and that was as far as it went so far.
Because you did the online surveys plus the focus groups, you said all the people in the focus groups were Caucasian.
Yes.
Did I miss possibly the breakdown of the online surveys at all? Did you get more than just white folk?
They were the majority.
Okay.
They had, I don't remember the exact percent, and that's why the data wasn't necessarily accurate, because the census in Alamosa was that the majority of the people here are of Hispanic heritage, but our online surveys showed that I mean, most were Caucasian, so
Well,
majority.
this does jive though with their previous research on their audiences, because they
Okay.
have done some previous research on who the audience is, and it does suggest that it's principally a white audience.
Yeah.
The, now, the list that you did for the online came from the donors, right? The people who have supported the station?
No, it's just,
Or just an email?
Just it, yeah,
To com-
Okay.
it was emailed to donors, and then it was also available on the website for anyone who
Right.
wanted.
for anyone, yeah, non-listeners and also listeners.
So do you think at all that socioeconomic status would influence that? If, I mean, you were contacting the donors directly, and then other people had to go to the website to get there, you know, in the valley, you do see a socioeconomic split between the Hispanic and Caucasian populations. Do you think that drove some of your results?
Definitely, there wasn't as much access for groups who don't actively listen to the station in any of our data. So the focus groups were primarily people who do listen to the station or are actively supportive of NPR, and the surveys were the same.
They tried to mitigate that with the mail surveys and with the phone surveys,
Yeah.
but the results for both of those methods was so low,
Yeah.
we just didn't have enough data to make it worthwhile.
What's low?
How many people did we talk to in the phone surveys? A dozen?
We didn't
Like,
get 20.
actually talked to probably 15,
Yeah.
12 to 15, without them hanging up before we began to talk.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, so
Phone calls did you make?
Hundreds.
we spent,
Yeah.
hours.
Every student spent at least 2 hours, each student in the class.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and mail surveys, and you can mail out 500 surveys and back 200%
Yeah.
response rate as well. Because that was my question, we rely on technology, which a lot of us do, because
Mhm.
our results that way. It's like, well, if my folks couldn't use a computer, someone took their finger and
Yeah.
but they're also not likely to respond to a phone or a mail survey, so it's really frustrating for researchers trying to get information from the younger population.
Yeah.
So they asked you to do any further follow-up work, or?
We have not been contacted, but it was through the class, so I don't know.
The board actually is having a retreat next weekend, and I'm planning to bring the final report from this research to that, because I'm not even sure that they've all read it. And so, I will bring that, and I'm really trying to push the board to do data-driven decision-making, so hopefully,
Good luck with that.
yeah.
I say, I'm one of the voters, I mean, I did that, the survey, and I very much, I like the NPR stuff,
Mhm.
I like the news stuff, and the rest, I don't listen to it.
Yeah.
Well,
That's what we
there's,
found.
Yep. That's.
I think you guys did a great job for one.
Thank you.
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
They really need to see this.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, you know, they need to make some tough decisions. They really do. You know, the mission's a great mission, but it's just, yeah.
Well, the problem that they're encountering, the significant problem is that the people who their mission pushes them towards are not the listeners, and they're also not the ones who are funding the station.
And that
And the people
makes-
who are
yeah.
listening and are funding are becoming increasingly frustrated.
Well, with streaming audio, you can simply
Right.
go get it elsewhere.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, that's NPR, I have it on my phone, so
Yeah.
I can walk around the street, you know.
Yeah.
You don't have to listen to KR, and that might even be a question for future stuff, is asking people, when you're not listening to KRZA, but you want this information, what are you turning to?
We did ask that.
We did ask
You
that,
did.
Okay.
yes.
And what did you find? I
It
guess
was,
Maybe I missed did you cover that?
No, it wasn't.
I don't know.
we didn't actually include it on the report either, I don't think. But they listen to other local stations, and I know in Taos, they have a choice. They have
They do,
2
yeah.
NPR stations they can contact there. When we did the focus group, they did say that usually they'll tune into the other one, but that this NPR station does offer some shows that they can't get on the other one, so they do have some listenership that way.
Nice work,
Thank you.
ladies.
Thank you.